Critical Thinking in Motion, Mastering Life's Challenges Through Critical Thinking and Strategy. Prologue, The Curveball. Lisbon carried the late afternoon like a secret. Trams rattled over cobblestones in Baixa. Gulls stitched white arcs across the estuary, and the river, wide as a promise, glowed the color of a copper coin. On the terrace of a cafe tucked behind Praca do Comércio, Aria Lynn watched her espresso cool while the email that had detonated her life sat open on her phone. We regret to inform you that the funding round has been pulled. Effective immediately, Kestrel Health will cease operations. She read it again, as if repetition might turn a landslide into a bruise. She wasn't from Lisbon. She'd only come for a 3-month trial as head of strategy at the digital clinic. The job had been a clean line out of cluttered past. 5 years of move-fast roles in Berlin, 3 burned-out managers, 1 impulsive breakup, and a heartbeat that had started to treat Slack pings like fire alarms. Across the plaza, a busker tuned a Portuguese guitar. The notes found the seams in the day. Aria slipped her phone face down. The door of the cafe chimed and a woman slid into the chair opposite her, setting a battered leather notebook on the table. "You're Aria," the woman said. Her accent carried Lagos in the vowels and London in the confidence. "I'm Irene Okoye. Raphael said you might need a lifeline." "Raphael Duarte?" Aria blinked. Kestrel's founder, whose apology email had read like a press release written inside a burning building. "The same," Irene said. Her eyes were precise, appraising brown of someone who noticed everything and cataloged only what mattered. He failed to mention the spectacular timing. "Are you always this calm when companies implode?" "I might be in delayed shock." Aria gestured at the river. "It's beautiful. Hard to panic at that scale." "That," Irene said, "is the trick. Keep your horizon larger than your crisis." A waiter drifted by and Irene ordered tea. No sugar. She opened her notebook and drew a square, then a web of lines connecting its corners and center. She labeled one edge pause, another orient, a third decide, and the last ACT. "What is this?" Aria asked. "A compass." "It's a loop," Irene said. "A thinking rhythm, used by pilots and more quietly by people who don't enjoy crashing. ODA. Observe, orient, decide, act. Raphael told me you're a strategist. I say anyone with a heartbeat needs strategy." "I don't feel like a strategist," Aria said. "I feel like cargo." "Then this is a good day to stop being shipped and start steering." Irene drew a second diagram, this time a chessboard, simplified to a handful of pieces. Most people play life the way they play checkers, 1 square at a time, forward if possible, sideways when trapped. Strategy is chess, pattern, position, and patience. It's hard to think long-term when the short-term is on fire. "True," Irene said, which is why strategic thinking begins with a pause that's long enough to pull the oxygen from the flames. She tapped the square labeled pause. 3 seconds. That's all you need to create a gap between your feeling and your move. Inside that gap, you can ask a better question. Aria tried it. She let the buzzing swarm of panic rise, named it fear, embarrassment, money, and then, in a breath that felt almost ceremonial, stepped back from it. The river remained. The guitar continued. A child trotted after a pigeon, laughing in 2 languages. "So," Irene said mildly, "what's the smartest move you can make right now?" The better question found her like a handhold in a dark stairwell. What do I want my future self to thank me for? An answer arrived, clarity. Not a dozen frantic emails. Not a performative LinkedIn post. Clarity about her endgame and the next best step. "I need to audit my options," Aria said. "Run a 48-hour triage. Finances, networks, visa, opportunities. Then choose the first leverage point." Irene's smile landed somewhere between approval and invitation. "Excellent. I consult for a boutique firm here, North Star Atelier. We're building a strategic residency for founders who burn bright and fast. Kestrel's postmortem is tomorrow morning. Come, watch how people behave when the pieces get knocked over. See the board." "Is this an interview?" "It's a mirror," Irene said. "For you, decide if you like who you are when you think during a storm." A bell tolled from a church uphill. The song in the square changed. Aria felt something almost comic in the timing. How her life's wreckage had found its way to a woman with a leather notebook and a loop that made emergencies look like choreography. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch, but there's a cost. If you say yes to this shift from reacting to responding, you can't unsee it. You'll start spotting patterns everywhere. It's addictive." "I could use a healthier addiction," Aria said. They shook hands. The sun slid lower, gilding the tile roofs to the west. When Aria lifted her cup at last, the espresso was cold. It tasted like a beginning. Field note, Aria, later that night. 3 seconds is longer than it sounds. Long enough to hear your first reaction knock, and long enough to let it leave politely. In the empty space, you can ask, what's the long game? Where is the leverage? Who benefits if I panic? Chapter 1. The Strategic Mindset. How to think before you react. Morning in Lisbon starts like a whisper conspiracy. The light is a private joke between sun and tile, and the city wakes with an elegance that makes urgency feel gauche. Aria took tram 28 uphill to Graca anyway, because late or not, grief moves at exactly the speed of bureaucracy. The Kestrel Health postmortem convened in a borrowed room at North Star Atelier, a converted embroidery factory with high windows and an interior of calm austerity. Pale oak tables, fig trees, walls the matte whited gallery between exhibits. A row of founders waited, sleep-rumpled and phone-bright. On a corkboard near the door, a neat hand had written, "What happened? What did it mean? What will we do now?" Irene stood at the front, not as an executioner, but as a conductor. Beside her, Rafael Duarte looked like a man who had slept inside a spreadsheet. Shirt wrinkled, tie abandoned, eyes glassy with a hangover of 1,000 small rationalizations. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice too formal. "As you know, our Series A." A door clicked and a tall man entered without apology, an immaculate gray suit turning his movement into a verdict. Victor Hale, a partner from Helix Capital, Kestrel's lead investor. Aria had met him twice and disliked him 3 times. He took a seat, placed a monogrammed notebook on the table, and smiled the way lawyers smile at contracts they wrote themselves. Irene's gaze skimmed the room and found Aria. A brief nod, observed first. Then she spoke, as if she planned the interruption. "This isn't a trial," she said. "It's a turning. We will look at the facts, name the forces, and design a path. Our discipline today is simple, no reacting. We will pause, we will ask better questions, and only then will we decide." She wrote a single sentence on the board. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." The first 20 minutes were the color of ash. Timelines, cash burn, promises made in the golden hour of pitch decks. Raphael confessed to an overconfident hiring plan. Helix confessed to nothing. Founders asked whether they'd be personally liable for software licenses. The air developed a film of fear. "Let's step back," Irene said at the first sign of a spiral. "Aria, you're new to Lisbon. You have fresh eyes. What do you observe? Not what you feel, not what you assume, but what you can see." Heads turned with a rustle. Aria felt the animal pulse of stage fright and used it like a metronome. 3 seconds. She let them stretch until her breathing landed. "I see 3 problems masquerading as one," she said. "A cash problem, a trust problem, and a meaning problem." "Explain," Victor said, the single word engineered to sound like a courtesy. "Cash is arithmetic," Aria said. "We ran out. Trust is narrative. Communication lagged behind reality. And meaning is existential. We told ourselves a story about who we were that didn't survive contact with the constraints. If we treat it as one problem, we'll prescribe the wrong medicine. If we treat it as 3, we have options. What options?" Raphael asked. "For cash, triage and runway mapping, cut, sell assets, or bridge. For trust, own the sequence and explain the why without blame. For meaning, design a smaller, truer mission that doesn't require lies to feel big." A murmur moved the room like wind through a wheat field. Irene's expression didn't change, but the tilt of her chin said keep going. Also, Aria added, "We should name the pattern. We mistook speed for strategy. We optimized for dopamine emotion, new features, new hires, new press, instead of outcomes. That made us fragile. Victor's pen clicked. You're suggesting what? That prudence would have saved the company in a competitive health tech market? We would have been outpaced. Not prudence, Aria said. Pattern awareness. Speed with a steering wheel. Irene drew the ODA loop again on the board. Observe, orient aside, act. Most teams skip orient, she said. It feels like inaction. But orientation is where you locate meaning. It's where you align action with intent and environment. If you skip it, you're not fast, you're random. A founder in the back, Matteo, who ran a sustainable packaging startup, raised a hand. How do you force orientation when you're underwater, when every day is a panic room? Ritual, Irene said, a pause you don't negotiate with. In my teams, it is 3 minutes at the top of any crisis meeting. No laptops, no speaking until the 3rd minute. We write, what's the outcome we want? What's the smallest next move that serves it? You'd be amazed what panic won't survive. Aria thought of her apartment sublet, of the suitcase that still smelled like the laundry of someone else's life, of the resume she could edit into a fairy tale by lunch. She thought of the river beyond the windows, how it looked like motion even when standing still. She took another breath, let her shoulders drop, and tried on the identity of someone who thought like this by choice, not by emergency. Let's test the room, Irene said. Silent reflection for 90 seconds. Write your worst impulse right now, the thing you want to do fastest. Then cross it out and write the action that would make future you grateful. Pens whispered. Victor did not write. When the 90 seconds ended, Irene nodded at Raphael. Share only the replacement action. Own our misstep for the team, he said. Today, not in a week. And ask them what they saw that we didn't. Matteo, pause the new product line. Call our top 3 customers and ask what actually matters to them in Q4. Build that. And you, Victor? Irene's voice stayed velvet. The question had edges. He made a show of closing his notebook. Helix will not be providing a bridge loan. Our action is to focus on diligence for future investments. A silence fell that was nearly physical. Then Aria did something that surprised even herself. I have a question, she said, looking directly at him. What would make Helix proud of its role here 6 months from now? Assume headlines. What do they say? A flicker of interest, then calculation. That we supported founders who were honest and resilient. Then Aria said gently, may I suggest a different action that costs you almost nothing and yields a headline? Share your post-mortem template, your pattern library of why early health tech companies slip. Give these teams that data. It's leverage without exposure. It wasn't a daring idea. It was an obvious one that everyone had been too angry to see. Victor held her gaze. Something eased in the set of his jaw. We can do that, he said at last. I'll send it this afternoon. The air changed temperature. Someone exhaled a laugh they'd been holding for a week. Field note, Aria. Influence isn't always power. Sometimes it's a well-timed question that swaps shame for agency. At lunch, North Star's kitchen became a low-stakes negotiation over olive oil, bread, and sardines and lemon, the kind of food that requires a pace slow enough to taste. Aria found Irene by the window, sunlight freckling the wooden table between them. You handled Victor without making him the villain, Irene said. That's harder than it looks. I didn't want to win, Aria said. I wanted a better game. Good language. Irene pushed a ceramic bowl her way. You think in metaphors. That's a strategist's shorthand. I'm more comfortable with maps than with speeches. Maps are only useful if you're willing to look at the terrain, Irene said, tilting her head toward the window and the river beyond. So, what's your terrain? Money for 3 months, Aria said. A German bank account that still thinks I live in Newcomb. A suitcase full of winter clothes I don't need, and a tendency to say yes when I'm flattered. Irene smiled. We can work with all of that. Raphael tells me you built Kestrel's patient intake funnel in a weekend, with duct tape and desperation. North Star loves duct tape, Irene said. We call it ingenuity when the client is listening. There's an opening here, strategic resident. 3 months. You'll rotate through live problems with our companies and build a toolkit as you go. Pay is survivable. The growth is not theoretical. Aria felt a familiar tug, ambition with a leash. She could picture the alternative. Stockholm with an X she wasn't done missing. Berlin again with its beautiful, punishing winters. A recruiter's narrowing eyes when she said the word sabbatical. Or this, a city that looked like the inside of a ceramic bowl and tasted like lemon. A mentor who spoke in verbs. Work that required thinking in public. What's the catch? She asked again, although she already knew. You'll have to practice what you'll preach, Irene said. No heroics. No martyrdom. We are ruthless about the pause. We are allergic to urgency that isn't real. And the residency ends in 3 months? Unless it doesn't, Irene said. But that's a bridge you don't have to cross from here. Aria looked at the river. The Tagus wore sunlight like armor. She thought about how most decisions feel like cliffs when they're actually stairs. One small step, then another, until suddenly you are somewhere else entirely. I accept, she said, and felt the word lift something inside her the way a lever lifts a load. Good, Irene said, as if she'd been waiting for a truth to arrive. Your first brief is at 4. We'll walk there. They walked east along the water. It was the hour of silver. The city slightly softened, like a face after laughter. Irene spoke without hurrying. Strategic thinking is not a personality trait, she said. It's hygiene. You do it daily, or the day begins to rule you. The first practice, name the game before you play it. What's the game this afternoon? Disaster relief, Irene said, and when Aria stopped, she added, no sirens, no rubble. A small company with a big mess, Marlin Freight. They ship artisanal goods across the EU. A single misrouted container has turned into a service failure menagerie. Angry partners, insurance snarls, perishable stock go to die somewhere outside Antwerp. Why us? They tried to fix it fast, Irene said. They sent more emails, offered apologies with discounts attached, worked all weekend. Nothing changed. That's the thing about speed. If you're fast in the wrong direction, you get lost with enormous efficiency. They arrived at Marlin's office, a narrow building painted a blue so bright it looked like a dare. Inside, the air had the sharp, medicinal scent of printer toner and stress. A man in his 40s with the posture of a question mark met them in the lobby. I'm Jonas, he said. Operations. Thank you for coming. Walk us through the last 48 hours. Irene said as they took seats in the glass box of a conference room. Aria will listen and map. Aria opened her notebook. Irene's lessons had already started reshaping the bones of her attention. Observe, collect unarguable facts. Orient, sort them into structures that reveal leverage. Decide, choose a minimal action with maximal learning. Act, move, then loop. Jonas poured out the story. The mislabeled container, the cascade of automated alerts that triggered no human intervention, the chain of apologies that went nowhere, the staff member who, trying to help, promised something impossible. As he spoke, Aria drew boxes and arrows, a small ecology of failure. She colored in the nodes where emotion had driven the car and logic had chased behind, wheezing. Stop there, she said gently when he reached for a new catastrophe. Let's mark patterns. Where did reactions replace choices? He blinked. Everywhere. Let's be precise, she said, and smiled to soften the scalpel. Here, your team answered emails faster instead of changing the message. Here, someone expanded scope out of guilt. Here, no one took 3 minutes to ask what's the outcome, and so the action served the feeling, not the goal. Jonas let out a ragged laugh. We were running. It felt like work. Running is work, Irene said. It's just not always progress. Let's install a pause. They did it there in the glass box. 3 minutes of silence, phones face down, pens on paper. Through the window, Aria watched forklifts bally their cargo in the yard like careful beasts. When the timer chimed, Irene nodded to Jonas. What's the outcome you want? He swallowed. Product delivered with dignity. Partners who trust us more, not less. A process that means we never do this kind of stupid again. Good, Irene said. Now the smallest next move that serves all three? Jonas looked to Aria, and she shook her head. You tell us. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the panic had stepped back half a meter. We stop answering and start calling. We call each partner, not to apologize first, but to map their reality. Then we design a single truthful script, not 5 variations. Then, tomorrow morning, we hold a blameless postmortem with the warehouse, IT, and customer care together, not in silos. We draw the loop on the wall. Aria felt something click, a small, satisfying gear. "May I add one more?" she asked. We identify the leverage point. In your map, it's the alert that pings a void. 1 human triage owner for anything tagged with cold chain product, and a 15-minute escalation rule. Jonas nodded, almost eager. "I'll be that owner." "Not forever," Irene warned, smiling. "Heroes burn, systems endure." They built the call script together. It didn't apologize like a supplicant. It apologized like an adult. It asked questions. It offered a clear make-good that aligned with what each partner valued, instead of what was cheapest to give. Irene insisted on one sentence Aria loved enough to steal. "I want to make the next right thing easy." By sunset, the yard was quieter, the forklifts resting their tusks. Jonas shook both of their hands in the parking lot as swallows stitched themselves across the sky. "I feel like I can breathe," he said. "Nothing has arrived yet, but I can breathe." "That's what orientation buys you," Irene said. "Air." On the tram back down the hill, Lisbon glowed like a rehearsal for evening. Aria stood by the rear window, palm on the cool glass, and watched the city unreel itself in reverse. Arches, tiles, laundry strung like flags of small nations. She thought about all the moments in the last 6 months when she had chosen speed instead of clarity, volume instead of precision. She thought about the tiny ritual that had already altered the shape of her day. A young couple boarded and squeezed beside her. The man murmured something in Portuguese, so tender it didn't need subtitles. The woman laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. Life doesn't stop for strategic thinking, Aria realized. It becomes easier to live because of it. She stepped off at Marta Moniz and walked the last blocks home. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. An email from Victor with the postmortem template, a calendar invite from Irene, a payment receipt from a bakery because she had accidentally tapped her card against a reader walking past, and the universe sometimes charged small taxes for beauty. In her notebook she wrote, before sleep could claim her, identity shift. I'm the person who pauses. Practice. 3 seconds every time it matters. Question. What would future me applaud? Tomorrow. See the board. Outside, Lisbon breathed in slow tides. Somewhere, a guitar learned a new song. And in the apartment with a suitcase that still smelled like someone else's detergent, a strategist began. Chapter 2. Clarity is power, defining your endgame. The office of North Star Atelier smelled faintly of cedar and ink, as though thought itself left a trace on the air. Aria sat at a long oak table with legal pad, while Irene paced like a general who preferred chalkboards to swords. Outside, Lisbon's rooftop staircase toward the river. The afternoon was all gold and patience. Yesterday you learned the pause, Irene said. Today you learned the lens. Without clarity, strategy is guesswork. So let's start. What do you want? Aria laughed before she could stop herself. Is that a philosophical question or a performance review? It's both, Irene said, smiling slightly, because every strategist has 2 jobs, to diagnose the world and to diagnose themselves. If you can't define your end game, you'll confuse speed for progress and applause for meaning. So what's the end game? Aria hesitated. The easy answers hovered, money, recognition, a better title, but they dissolved against the weight of question. She thought her parents in Vancouver, who still introduced her as our daughter, who does something with startups. She thought of nights in Berlin when she had worked until sunrise, chasing metrics no one remembered. I want to matter, she said finally, not as in fame, but I want my work to survive the quarter it was built for. That, Irene said, is a compass. Now sharpen it. What shape does mattering take? A company? A movement? A book? A family? Aria looked down at her legal pad. Her hand moved before her doubts could intercept it. Financial independence. Enough to choose projects, not beg for them. Work that compounds. products or systems that make life saner for others. Time autonomy. Fridays free for people she loved, not people who scheduled her. When she slid the pad across, Irene read it once and nodded. Better. Now, reverse engineer. Imagine yourself 5 years from now. Where must you stand for this to be true? Aria closed her eyes. 5 years. She saw a flat in a sunlit city, not Lisbon, not Berlin, maybe Barcelona, with a desk that didn't travel every 6 months. She saw a client list of names she respected. She saw her mother no longer asking if she was still in that unstable startup phase. She saw freedom to say no. I need stability that doesn't cage me, she murmured, and credibility that isn't borrowed. Good, Irene said. Now list the steps backward, like footprints. What's the step before stability? A portfolio that proves I can create value, not just chase it. And before that, projects I can point to, wins that are visible. And before that, deciding which wins even count. The exercise left her both drained and strangely lit, like running a hill in the dark and finding herself at a viewpoint. Irene tapped her pen against the table. Clarity feels costly at first, she said. It burns away the pretty distractions. But once you know your end game, decisions become subtraction, not multiplication. You subtract everything that doesn't serve it. You say no until the yes shines obvious. That evening, Aria's assignment was not a market analysis or a spreadsheet. It was a walk. Irene insisted she leave her phone and wander until the city asked her something. She followed the tram tracks through Alfama, where fado singers rehearsed in dim taverns. She paused in front of tiled walls where saints stared with patient severity. She stopped at a miraduro where teenagers dangled their legs over stone, laughing at something that belonged only to them. Her notebook came out. She wrote without editing. I want to build something that does not vanish when funding does. I want to use my mind as a tool, not as a fire extinguisher. I want to measure life not in email sent, but in Friday's won. She underlined the last line until the page nearly tore. A stranger selling roasted chestnuts shuffled over and held out a small paper cone. Aria hesitated, then bought one. The warmth seeped into her palms. She realized clarity was not a lightning strike. It was a slow unpeeling of smoke until something simple remained. 2 days later, the test came. Marlin Freight, the shipping company they had helped triage, was back with a new problem. Their CEO, a harried Belgian named Claudine Vermeer, had booked an emergency consult. In North Star's conference room, Claudine slapped a folder down. We're considering expansion into refrigerated pharma shipments, she said. High risk, high margin. But my board is split. I need strategy. Fast. Irene leaned back. Aria run the room. Aria's pulse ticked faster, but she remembered. Pause first. She asked Claudine the same question Irene had asked her. What's the end game? Growth, Claudine said instantly. Revenue up by 30%. That's a number. Aria said gently. What does it buy you? Security? Market dominance? Reputation? Freedom to sell? What's the story in 5 years? Claudine faltered. Reputation. We want to be known as the boutique carrier that handles fragile cargo with care. Then let's reverse engineer. Aria said, Pharma isn't just revenue. It's reputation at gunpoint. If one crate fails, your boutique name dies. Does this path serve the end game of reputation or distract from it? The room went quiet. Claudine rubbed her temples. When you phrase it that way, pharma is a detour. We should double down on artisanal goods and foods. Protect what we're already trusted for. That's clarity, Aria said. Now your strategy isn't about chasing a shiny margin. It's about compounding the reputation that makes you matter. After the meeting, Claudine shook her hand. You didn't tell me what to do, she said. You forced me to name what I really want. That was worth more than any market report. Back at North Star, Irene poured 2 cups of green tea. Well, she asked. Aria exhaled. It worked. Clarity worked. I thought strategy was about clever moves, but it's just honesty stretched forward in time. Exactly, Irene said. A strategist without clarity is a tourist with too many maps. A strategist with clarity is a navigator, even if the sea changes. She raised her cup. So, endgame? Aria lifted hers, the steam rising between them like a pact. To matter with compounding work. And Fridays free. Then every decision from here, Irene said, will either feed that endgame or steal from it. Train your eyes to tell the difference. That night, Aria slept better than she had in months. And when she woke before dawn to the sound of gulls, she wrote a single sentence on the first page of a new notebook. I am designing, not drifting. Chapter 3. Information is ammunition. Learn before you move. The North Star offices were quiet that morning, except for the hum of the espresso machine and the distant gulls that always seemed to argue over invisible territory. Aria arrived early, notebook under her arm, her head filled with the taste of clarity from the last chapter of her life. But Irene had warned her, clarity without insight is still a blunt blade. Today, she would learn to sharpen it. On the long oak table, Irene laid out a slim dossier. The paper smelled faintly of toner, urgency, and someone else's fingerprints. Your first solo case, Irene said. Viridian Glassworks, based in Porto. Boutique architectural glass supplier. They're preparing to bid on a landmark contract for a new eco-museum in Lyon. They want strategy. They want speed. They want you. Aria opened the dossier. The client brief was 3 pages of glowing adjectives. Innovative, sustainable, artisanal. Almost nothing about numbers, processes, or competitors. This is just a brochure, Aria said. Exactly, Irene replied. And most rookies would sprint from here. They'd start designing pitches, rehearsing taglines, drafting pricing models. But speed without sight is suicide. Your job is to gather intelligence before you move. Information, Aria murmured, remembering Irene's words, as ammunition. Irene nodded. A strategist who doesn't research is a gambler with borrowed chips. Go, learn. Call me only when you've mapped the terrain. By afternoon, Aria was on a train to Porto, a notebook balanced against the jolt of the tracks. Through the window, Portugal blurred into vineyards and sea cliffs, the light turning silver on tile villages. She listed what she needed to know. Who are Viridian's real competitors? What is the museum's decision criteria? Price, innovation, sustainability, prestige? What failures in the market could Viridian exploit? What data can be trusted? When she arrived, Viridian's office sat on the edge of the Douro, glass panels stacked like sleeping giants in the warehouse. The CEO, Luis Teixeira, greeted her with the distracted energy of a man who loved craft more than spreadsheets. We don't have time for endless research, Luis said as they walked among pallets. The tender is due in 2 weeks. We need positioning. A bold story. Stories are powerful, Aria said, but they die if they aren't armed with facts. Let me learn first what you make, who buys it, who else is trying to win Lion. Otherwise, we're firing blanks. Luis frowned, but gestured toward his head of sales, a wiry woman named Marta Silva. Give her what she wants, but don't get lost in analysis. That evening, Aria camped in a cafe near the Ribera, spreading papers like a cartographer of invisible wars. She called Lion Procurement Office, pretending to be a curious journalist. She searched trade journals, tracked press releases, scanned for trends. She found that Viridian's largest rival, Nordic Materials of Hamburg, had been penalized last year for supply chain opacity. Another competitor, Solovetro Milan, was brilliant with aesthetics but notoriously weak in durability tests. A pattern emerged. The Eco-Museum valued transparency and resilience more than flashy design. She underlined it 3 times. Transparency plus resilience equals Viridian's edge. By midnight, her notes looked less like a jumble and more like a map. The ammunition was assembling. Field note, Aria. Information doesn't just fill a page. It reshapes the question. Without it, you argue on the wrong battlefield. With it, you see where the enemy has already left the gate open. The next morning, Marta tested her. You've got 1 hour to present, she said. If your ideas sound like common sense, Luis will ignore you. If they sound like a fairy tale, he'll ignore you faster. Aria took a breath. Pause. Orient. Decide. Act. Here's what I've learned, she began. The Lion Museum has 4 key decision drivers: sustainability, resilience, transparency, and prestige. Nordic will try to dominate with scale, but their weakness is opaque sourcing. Solivetro will lean on design beauty, but they can't pass resilience testing without cost overruns. Viridian's story is this: we are the transparent artisans of glass that lasts. Your supply chain is local. Your durability scores are strong. Your artisanship adds prestige without compromising function. That's your ammunition. Luis leaned back, rubbing his beard. Marta folded her arms. Silence stretched. Then Luis nodded slowly. That isn't just a story. It's an angle, a weapon. It's also the truth, Aria said. But it only works if you can prove it, which means audits, testing reports, customer testimonials. That's the evidence we submit, not slogans. Marta's mouth curled into something like a grin. Not bad, strategist. You might just win us Lion. That night, on the train back to Lisbon, the river flashing under bridges like a ribbon of mercury, Aria reflected. Without research, she would have written a deck about beauty and innovation. It might have sounded polished, but it would have misfired. Instead, she had ammunition, relevant, credible, timely information that gave Viridian not just a voice, but position. Her notebook filled with a new mantra: fast is good, smart is better. Fast and smart is unstoppable. And for the first time in months, she believed she could be all 3. Chapter 4. Seeing the board, mastering the big picture. The storm came without thunder. It arrived as a string of terse emails, a shifting of alliances, a silence where there should have been answers. By the time Aria reached the North Star Atelier offices, the air was already charged. Irene stood before the corkboard wall, pushing colored pins into a map of Europe. Each pin marked a client. Logistics firms in Antwerp, fashion collectives in Florence, clean tech startups in Oslo. Red threads crisscross between them like veins of some vast, beating organism. Today you stop thinking in moves, Irene said, gesturing Aria closer. You start thinking in boards. Because in strategy, what you see determines what you can play. Aria studied the tangle of threads. Some lines looked random, others like hidden constellations. She felt as though Irene had built a private universe from string. What's happening? Aria asked. Marlin Freight is in trouble again, Irene replied. Not containers this time. Politics. Their largest distributor in Rotterdam is being courted by a rival. If the distributor shifts allegiance, Marlin loses 40% of its European flow. Jonas is panicking. Can't Marlin just sweeten the contract? That's the reactive move, Irene said. Checkers. But this isn't checkers. This is chess. And to play chess, you must see the whole board. Players, positions, power. They traveled to Rotterdam the next morning. The city was steel and water, cranes moving with slow grace against the sky. Marlin's office overlooked the port, where ships queued like giants. Jonas looked worse than the last time. Ty Askew, forehead damp, desperation humming in his voice. The distributor is wavering, he said, pacing. They've had meetings with Blue Wave Logistics. We can't lose them. If we do, we're finished. Aria listened, resisting the urge to soothe. Irene had drilled it into her. Observe first, orient later. Who are the players? Aria asked. Jonas blinked. Players? Yes. Name them. You, the distributor, Blue Wave. Who else matters? Who influences decisions behind the scenes? Jonas hesitated. Well, the distributor's CFO. She's cautious, risk-averse. Their COO, he likes innovation, speed. Blue Wave's pitch is cheaper rates and faster delivery. And he trailed off. And Aria pressed. The city council, Jonas admitted, they're pushing for sustainability metrics in contracts. If Blue Wave promises greener fleets, that tips the scale. Aria's pen moved across her notebook. Players, Marlin, distributor CFO, distributor COO, Blue Wave, city council, each with interests, fears, leverage. A web, not a line. Now the positions, she said. Who holds what power? Jonas stared, then slowly began to see it. CFO equals financial caution. COO equals innovation hunger. City equals public pressure. Blue wave equals cost advantage. Marlin equals reliability plus relationships. This isn't a price war, Aria said. It's a positioning war. You're strong on reliability, but you need to shift perception from safe and boring to reliable and innovative and compliant with sustainability. Jonas sank into a chair. How? By mapping patterns, Aria said. Every time you've pitched, you've led with cost and speed. That pattern makes you look like a discount brand. Break the pattern. Lead with transparency, environmental metrics, and data-backed reliability. Court the council openly. Make sustainability your shared language. That forces Blue Wave to compete where they're weak. That evening, Aria walked alone along the canals, neon signs reflecting in the black water. She thought about Irene's board with its red strings, about how power and influence rarely lived where you expected. She remembered Berlin, the jobs where she'd rush without seeing the system. Fixing symptoms, never root causes. She'd never asked, who else is on this board? What moves are invisible? She realized she had been playing checkers in a world made of chessboards layered one atop the other. Field note, Aria. The board is bigger than the square in front of you. See the players, map the power, trace the patterns. When you see the board, panic turns into possibility. The next morning, they met with a distributor. A polished boardroom, the CFO's expression sharp, the COO's restless energy filling the space. Irene remained silent, giving Aria the floor. Jonas began the old pitch, cost-saving, shipment accuracy. But Aria leaned forward and cut gently across. Before we discuss numbers, may I ask, what matters most for the future of your supply chain? Stability? Innovation? Compliance? The CFO spoke first. Risk reduction. We can't afford volatility. The COO chimed in. Innovation. Blue Wave promises predictive routing with AI. Hard to ignore. And the city council? Aria asked. Their new green mandate must weigh on your board. The CFO and COO exchanged a glance. Yes, the CFO admitted. We can't look careless in the press. Then let's talk about patterns, Aria said. Blue Wave promises speed, but their past 5 contracts ended with late penalties. Marlin doesn't promise speed. It delivers reliability. Add transparency. Audited sustainability metrics. An eco-report designed for the council. That positions Marlin not just as a vendor, but as a partner in your reputation. Silence. Then the COO leaned back, intrigued. The CFO's pen tapped once, then stilled. We need to see that eco-report, she said finally. You'll have it in 3 days, Aria promised. On the flight back to Lisbon, Jonas clasped her hand. You didn't sell. You reframed the whole game. I think we'll keep them. Aria smiled, though fatigue tugged at her. I just saw the board. In Lisbon, Irene met them with her notebook. Report. We shifted Marlin from price to position. Aria said, from discount to partner, by showing the players the power to patterns. Irene's eyes warmed. Good. That's the leap most strategists never make. Seeing the board makes you harder to surprise. And in strategy, surprise is death. That night, Aria wrote in her journal, I will not play checkers. I will see the board. I will map the system before I move. And she felt, for the first time, less like a passenger and more like someone who could steer not only her career, but the game itself. Chapter 5. Anticipation. The key to outsmarting obstacles. The first warning came not from a client, but from the weather. Lisbon's sky had turned the color of pewter, and the Tagus rolled restless, waves slapping against the seawall as if impatient for something to break. Irene stood by the window of North Star Atelier, arms folded, watching the storm advance. Perfect day to talk about foresight, she said, because strategy isn't just about what's true today. It's about what's coming tomorrow, and what you do before it arrives. Aria sat at the oak table, notebook open, pen ready. The last weeks had sharpened her, pausing, clarifying, mapping the board, but anticipation felt like a higher-order thinking one step deeper than she'd ever practiced. "Here's your test," Irene said, turning. Horizon Robotics, a London-based startup, is about to pitch a new line of medical assist robots to investors. Their clients. They believe the pitch is bulletproof. I believe it's full of blind spots. I want you to anticipate the obstacles before they walk into the room tomorrow. Aria's pulse ticked faster. Without seeing the pitch? Exactly. Learn to see shadows before they appear. That night, Aria worked in her apartment, rain tapping the balcony like a metronome. She pulled everything she could find on Horizon, their patent filings, demo videos, press coverage. She imagined the pitch unfolding, each slide a possible move. She wrote 3 columns. Likely scenario. Investors impress, but demand evidence of clinical safety. Worst case, a demo glitch or tough question exposes gaps. Credibility collapses. Best case, interest surges. Horizon isn't prepared for scale. Growth implodes under success. She traced contingencies backward. If safety questions came, Horizon needed peer-reviewed data. If scale questions came, they needed a phased rollout plan. If the demo failed, they needed video backup. By 2 a.m., her wall looked like a crime board. Arrows, sticky notes, the word "what if?" scrawled in thick ink. Field note, Aria. Anticipation is not paranoia. It's preparation. You don't predict the future. You prepare for its shapes. That way, whatever shows up, you've already met it once in your mind. The next afternoon in London, the boardroom gleamed chrome and glass. Investors in dark suits sat with faces designed to reveal nothing. Horizon CEO Kavita Shah began her pitch, voice steady, slides clean. For 20 minutes, everything looked smooth. Then an investor leaned forward. Impressive demo. But where's the independent safety data? Kavita froze, a flicker of panic. Aria leaned forward from her corner seat. "We anticipated that," she said calmly. Appendix Slide 42, peer-reviewed pilot study from St. Thomas's Hospital. It validates safety metrics across 35 cases. We preloaded copies for your review. The investor blinked, surprised. Nods moved around the table. 10 minutes later, another challenge. If adoption spikes faster than you expect, how do you scale without overpromising? Kavita looked at Aria. Scenario 3, Aria said, phase rollout. Clinical partnerships in 3 cities first. Supply chain contracts already lined up for modular scaling. It's designed to absorb success instead of being crushed by it. By the end, Horizon had not just survived, it had impressed. Investors asked for follow-up meetings. Kavita exhaled as the room emptied. "You saved us," she whispered. Aria shook her head. "You saved yourself. You just needed someone to imagine the storm before it hit." On the flight back, Irene sipped tea, calm as the clouds outside. "You see now why anticipation is power." Aria nodded. "It's like mental time travel. You run the scenarios, walk the branches, and by the time the future arrives, you've already been there." "Exactly," Irene said. "Reactive minds drown. Strategic minds surf. The difference is anticipation." Aria thought of her past jobs, how often she had scrambled, unprepared, convincing herself a storm was unpredictable. She realized it wasn't unpredictability that had beaten her. It was her lack of rehearsal. That night in Lisbon, she wrote a vow in her notebook. "From now on, I will never walk blind into tomorrow. I will ask, what if? I will prepare, not just hope." Outside, the storm had passed. The air was fresh, rinsed. And for the first time, Aria felt as though the horizon wasn't a threat, but an ally, something she could learn to read, to meet, and maybe even to bend. Chapter 6. Timing is strategy, when to move and when to wait. The email subject line read like a flare. Urgent. Opportunity window. Act now. It came from Marlon Freites Jonas, who seemed perpetually trapped between crisis and coffee. This time, he had discovered what looked like a lifeline, a lucrative government contract to modernize port logistics in Valencia. The catch? Applications closed in 72 hours. By the time Aria and Irene arrived at North Star's war room table, Jonas was already vibrating with urgency. "We can't miss this," he said, pacing. 3 days. If we don't move immediately, Blue Wave will get it. Aria scanned the brief. The project promised prestige and cash, but the requirements were murky. Digital infrastructure upgrades, emission reduction targets, dozens of undefined compliance clauses. "It's risky," she said slowly. "It's gold," Jonas countered. "We'll regret not leaping." Irene watched him with patient detachment. "Timing is the difference between a win and a waste," she said. "Aria, what's your read?" Aria paused. Her instinct screamed to match Jonas's urgency. Action felt like safety. But she remembered Irene's lesson. Fast is not the same as right. She laid out 2 timelines on a whiteboard. Immediate action. Submit in 72 hours, rushed, shallow research, high chance of disqualification or overcommitment. Delayed action. Skip this round. Prepare for the next funding cycle in 6 months with airtight compliance, stronger eco-credentials, and council allies already cultivated. "Jonas," she said carefully, "if you sprint now, you risk promising things you can't deliver. If you wait, you can walk in 6 months as a prepared partner, not the desperate bidder." "But we'll look slow," Jonas snapped. "Blue Wave will take the spotlight." "Sometimes letting your rivals sprint into the trap is strategy," Aria said. Irene raised an eyebrow. "Good. Test the theory." The next morning, they researched Blue Wave's application style. Public records showed a pattern. Aggressive promises, undercooked follow-through. They often won early contracts only to drown in penalties later. Aria drafted a quiet plan. Instead of applying, Marlin would lobby the council now, submitting sustainability audits, hosting workshops, cultivating allies. When the next cycle opened, they'd be the trusted, prepared bidder with proof, not promises. Jonas hated it, but reluctantly he agreed. 6 months later, news broke. Blue Wave had indeed won the Valencia contract, and within weeks, headlines followed about miscompliance and soaring costs. By the time the council reopened bidding, Blue Wave's credibility was shot. Marlin, armed with 6 months of groundwork, slid in with a measured, credible bid. This time, the council welcomed them like an antidote. Back at North Star, Irene looked at Aria with a rare smile. "You see? Timing isn't delay. It's discipline. You can win by waiting, if waiting is deliberate." Aria thought back to her old jobs, to all the times she had jumped because silence felt unbearable. She realized those moves hadn't been strategy. They had been reflex. Now, she wrote in her notebook, "I will not confuse urgency with opportunity. I will master the tempo, not chase it. Strategy is knowing when to hold fire." Outside, Lisbon's evening bells rang, slow and measured. For once, Aria felt her own heartbeat match their rhythm, steady, unhurried, precisely on time. Chapter 7, Leverage, How to Win with Less Effort. The rain had not stopped in Barcelona for 2 days. Aria sat by the cafe window across from L. Bourne's Gothic stone arches, watching umbrellas weave like black chess pieces across the cobbled street. Irene had asked her to prepare a presentation for North Star's partners, how to make a small company's voice matter against giants like Blue Wave. Aria's first instinct was overwhelm. Blue Wave had 5 times the staff, deep capital reserves, and political lobbyists on speed dial. How could Marlin Freight, with its modest budget and shaky history, ever compete? When she voiced this to Irene, the mentor leaned back and stirred her tea slowly. "Leverage," Irene said. "A crowbar doesn't need to be big to move stone. It needs to be placed right." The following week, Aria visited Marlin's warehouse at the edge of the port. She noticed the operation was messy, but not inefficient. Workers were loyal, the fleet was lean, and the software, though outdated, produced unique efficiency reports no rival had. She highlighted a discovery on the whiteboard. Marlin had the only real-time emissions tracking system in the region. "It's underused," Aria explained. "We think of it as boring compliance data. But framed differently, this is leverage. We can make this our unique power, showing councils we are the green, transparent option. Blue Wave can't fake that." Jonas blinked. "You're saying a spreadsheet is our secret weapon?" "I'm saying your overlooked system is the lever that shifts perception." Aria replied. To test the theory, they piloted a campaign. Instead of advertising trucks or rates, Marlin released live dashboards of emissions cuts during runs. The story caught the attention of La Vanguardia, Barcelona's biggest newspaper. Within days, journalists framed Marlin as the honest disruptor, small but transparent. Investors started calling. So did city officials. All from one hidden asset no one had thought to use. But Aria wanted to push the lesson deeper. She experimented with 3 forms of leverage. Time leverage, automating reports so employees didn't waste hours on compliance paperwork. Skill leverage, positioning Jonas as a charismatic storyteller rather than a frazzled operations man. He recorded a short video, narrating how emissions tracking helped protect the Mediterranean. The video went viral on LinkedIn. Network leverage. Irene connected Aria with her old professor in Rotterdam, who knew European sustainability officers. With one introduction, Marlin was suddenly inside circles they had never reached before. Each small move multiplied impact. Late one night, Aria sat on the rooftop terrace of her small rented flat. Rain had cleared. The city smelled of wet stone and oranges. She opened her journal. Leverage is not about pushing harder. It's about finding the point where a finger moves a boulder. She realized this applied beyond business. In her own life, she had been trying to work harder, stay later, sacrifice more. But perhaps her real power lay in spotting her hidden assets, her bilingual fluency, her empathy that disarmed tense rooms, her network of quiet allies she had never tapped. The idea settled into her bones. Well, you already can become unstoppable if you use it differently. The next morning, she walked into North Star's boardroom. Irene asked, "So, Aria, what's your lever?" Aria smiled, and for once, her answer was clear. Chapter 8, Adapting on the Fly, Strategic Agility in Action. The day began with celebration. Marlin Freight had just secured a promising letter of intent from the Barcelona Port Authority. Jonas, beaming, poured cheap cava into mismatched glasses, declaring, "Finally, we're on the map." But by evening, the celebration curdled. A breaking headline spread across news feeds. New EU maritime regulation effective immediately. Compliance required for all bidders. The rules tightened emissions standards overnight. Larger firms like Blue Wave had legal teams already mobilized. Marlin, with its lean crew, was suddenly at risk of being disqualified from contracts it had worked months to secure. Jonas panicked. "We're finished. We don't have the staff to rewrite compliance reports in time." Aria's chest tightened. All her carefully built strategy now looked fragile, exposed to a storm she hadn't predicted. She looked at Irene, who was calmly closing her laptop. "This is the moment," Irene said softly. "Adapt or dissolve. What's your move?" Aria inhaled slowly, grounding herself. "Don't panic. Pivot." She sketched on the whiteboard. What has changed? New regulations, immediate effect. What remains true? Marlin's real-time emissions tracking system. What assumptions must be adjusted? That 6 months of prep time remained. She turned to Jonas. "We're not dead. We already have live emissions data. Most companies don't. If we can format it into compliance-ready dashboards within 48 hours, we can lead with agility instead of lagging." Jonas frowned. "But we don't have compliance lawyers." Aria's eyes sharpened. "We don't need lawyers first. We need clarity. We'll use our existing data as proof. I'll call Irene's contact in Rotterdam for a template, and you rally the warehouse staff to tag every shipment in real time tonight." Irene nodded once. "Good. That's an adaptive frame." The next 48 hours blurred. Aria barely slept. She coordinated with programmers in Lisbon who built a visualization layer overnight. Jonas directed drivers like a general, making sure every truck logged accurate emissions numbers. By the deadline, Marlin submitted not just a compliance report, but an interactive emissions dashboard, sleek and accessible. The Port Authority's reply was immediate. "This is the clearest compliance model we've received. Can we present it to the EU Council as a case example?" Jonas slumped into his chair, eyes wide. "We were drowning, and now we're leading?" Aria smiled weakly. "We bent without breaking. That's agility." Irene, who had been silent, finally spoke. Remember this, Aria. Strategy is not about clinging to the plan. It's about holding the vision steady while the path shifts under your feet. You adjusted, not abandoned. That's the mark of a strategist. That night, on her balcony, Aria let exhaustion wash over her. Below, Barcelona's narrow streets were alive with music and scooters. She scribbled in her journal. Flexibility is not weakness. It is survival with direction. She thought of her own life, how she had once treated every disruption as catastrophe. But now, she saw, change was not the enemy. The refusal to adapt was. For the first time, she felt not just like a learner, but like someone others could follow through the storm. Chapter 9, Psychological Warfare, Outsmarting Through Influence. The conference hall in Geneva buzzed like a hive. Representatives from logistics firms across Europe mingled beneath glass chandeliers, each eager to secure a slice of new EU infrastructure funding. Marlin Freight had a booth tucked in the corner. Small, understated, almost invisible next to Blue Wave's glossy screens and champagne reception table. Jonas muttered as he adjusted their modest banner. "We look like amateurs," he said. Aria, however, wasn't watching the booths. She was watching people. Irene's words echoed in her mind. Numbers don't move decisions. People do. And people are moved by what they feel more than what they know. Blue Wave CEO Clara Donati was working the room with military precision. She spoke in polished sound bites, shaking hands, dazzling with statistics. Aria noticed how attendees nodded politely, but their eyes flickered, fatigued by the flood of data. Then came Marlin's turn to present. Jonas began with charts, but Aria gently touched his sleeve. She stepped forward, abandoning the slides. "Let me tell you a story," she began. She described a truck driver named Luis, who had worked the Barcelona routes for 20 years. How Luis once confessed he feared his grandchildren wouldn't inherit a coast clean enough to swim in. How Marlin's emissions dashboard wasn't just numbers. It was Luis's way of making sure his routes gave back to the Mediterranean, not stripped it. The room stilled. Faces softened. "This isn't about contracts," Aria said, her voice steady. "It's about trust, about making logistics not invisible, but human. That's what Marlin stands for." Applause rose, not thunderous, but genuine. Later, Irene found her in the corridor. "You just shifted perception," Irene said. "Blue Wave has more capital, more lawyers. But you just made them look cold. You outflanked them without touching their numbers." Aria tilted her head. "By telling one man's story?" "By aligning with human need," Irene corrected. "Autonomy, belonging, competence. Those are the levers. Pull them gently, and people will move where numbers cannot." Over the next days, Aria practiced subtle influence. Listening first. Instead of pitching, she asked delegates, "What keeps you up at night about your ports?" Framing wisely, she positioned Marlin's small size as agility, not weakness. Reciprocity. She offered insights freely, connecting officials to sustainability experts without asking for favors. One evening, a Danish council member whispered to her, "You know, your company may be small, but everyone's talking about you." You're the only booth people felt. Jonas was stunned. We didn't outspend Blue Wave. We didn't outstaff them. We outstoried them. Aria smiled faintly. Influence isn't force. It's alignment. That night, writing in her journal under Geneva's crisp night sky, she realized something deeper. True power isn't about making people obey. It's about making them believe. And when belief shifts, entire systems follow. Chapter 10, Execution. Turning strategy into real-world results. Winter fell heavy over Rotterdam's port. Cranes looming like steel skeletons against a gray sky. The city was preparing for one of the largest logistics summits in Europe. Contracts worth millions were at stake. Contracts that could define Marlin Freight's survival. Jonas paced the hotel suite, his tie crooked. "We've got vision, clarity, influence, but if we choke tomorrow, it's meaningless." Aria looked at the folders stacked on the table. Months of strategy had led to this moment. Irene sat in the corner armchair, quiet, almost meditative. "Execution," Irene said finally, "is where dreamers fall and leaders rise." Strategy in the head is elegant. Strategy in the world is messy. The question is, can you move with discipline when it matters most? The next morning, the hall buzzed with competition. Blue Wave arrived with polished presentations and an army of consultants. Smaller firms jockeyed for attention. Aria took the stage with Jonas at her side. Instead of overwhelming the audience with slides, she began with a single line on the screen. What good is strategy if you can't deliver it? Then she laid out their system. Not theory, proof. Real-time emissions dashboards live on screen. Stream from trucks currently moving goods in Barcelona. Compliance reports automated to cut costs by 40%. A pilot partnership with Valencia, already reducing port congestion by 12%. It wasn't abstract. It was tangible. Executed. The room leaned in. Questions came sharp and fast. Aria answered calmly, drawing on every lesson she had practiced. Clarity, anticipation, influence. Jonas, once flustered, spoke with conviction, showing graphs of impact already achieved. When the session ended, silence hung for a breath before applause swelled. Later, as the council announced bids, Blue Wave won one major contract. But Marlin, to everyone's shock, secured two strategic projects, smaller in size but higher in visibility. Projects that positioned them as the future face of sustainable logistics in Europe. Jonas was speechless. We actually pulled it off. Aria exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear this time, but from release. Months of theory had become reality. Strategy had walked, breathed, lived. That night, Irene joined Aria on the pier, where the North Sea winds whipped salt into the air. "You've crossed the threshold," Irene said. "You no longer just think strategically. You act strategically." Aria smiled faintly. "It still feels fragile, like it could all fall apart." "It always will," Irene replied. "That's life. But now you have tools. You have discipline. You know how to pause, see the board, pivot, persuade, and, most importantly, execute. That makes you unstoppable." Aria gazed at the ship slipping into the horizon, their lights winking like constellations. For the first time, she felt not like a passenger in her own story, but the captain. She pulled out her journal and wrote the words that had guided her all along. Strategy isn't thinking, it's choosing. And then it's doing. Epilogue, the long game. Spring returned to Lisbon. The narrow streets were alive with music again, and the scent of grilled sardines drifted up from the waterfront. Aria sat at her favorite cafe table, the same one where, months ago, she had first wondered if she was out her depth. Now her notebook lay open, its pages filled with scribbles, plans, patterns, questions, and the quiet victories that had carried her from student to strategist. Jonas called from Barcelona, his voice almost unrecognizable, steady, confident. Marlin Freight had not become an empire overnight, but had become something stronger, resilient, respected, ready. And Irene? She had already moved on to another project, vanishing like a mentor should, leaving only her word behind. Strategy is not knowledge. It is habit. Live it daily. Aria looked across the Praca do Comércio, where the Tagus River glittered in the late light. Tourists posed for photos, unaware of the silent battles fought in boardrooms and council halls, of the quiet choices that shifted futures. She realized that she had become someone new, not by winning every deal, but by changing how she thought. No longer reactive, no longer driven by panic or impulse. Now, she moved with clarity, with foresight, with calm, and she understood strategic thinking wasn't about outsmarting others. It was about outsmarting her own fears, her own short-sightedness. She closed her notebook with a soft snap, smiling to herself. Life was not a sprint. It was a long game, and now she knew how to play. The bells of Lisbon began to chime the hour. Aria rose, paid her bill, and stepped into the square with her head high. Not rushing, not hesitating, but walking forward with deliberate, strategic grace.